Did you see his face? He wasn't scared at all. She was shouting, but he never even moved. Something's not right. He's hiding something. The whispers spread like fire across the street, turning into a quiet buzz of curiosity. For years, Karen had been the loudest, scariest presence in the valley. But tonight there was something in the man's calm that made her fury look weak. Back at her house, Karen threw the eviction papers onto her table, scattering them like broken shields. Her face was red, her hands shaking as she poured herself a drink. He thinks he can outsmart me, she muttered. He thinks his silence makes him stronger. But I'll show him. I'll show them all. This is my community. I built it. Without me, it falls apart. She scribbled furious notes on new sheets of paper, drafting fresh complaints, more violations, anything she could invent to justify her threats. She sent messages to the HOA board, summoning them for an emergency meeting. Some replied reluctantly, others ignored her, but Karen refused to accept defeat. They'll listen, she growled to herself. They always listen. The man, however, didn't move from his porch. He watched the lake as if nothing had happened, the cup steady in his hand, his eyes calm. His wife came out quietly, standing beside him. She didn't ask what Karen had said. She already knew. She only whispered, "It's starting." The man nodded once, his gaze steady on the horizon where the last of the light was fading. "It's been starting for a long time," he replied softly. "Now everyone else will see it too." The next day, Karen arrived with a larger group. HOA members walked nervously behind her, some holding clipboards, others clutching pens like weapons. She marched straight to the cabin, waving another stack of papers. Neighbors gathered outside, no longer hiding but still cautious, drawn by the noise. Karen's voice carried like a siren. "This man is in violation of everything this association stands for. His cabin is not up to code. His land is not approved. He is trespassing on property that belongs to us, and he will leave or be removed by force." Her words echoed across the lake, but instead of silence, she was met with murmurs. The neighbors weren't nodding in fear anymore. They were questioning, whispering, some even frowning at her. The man finally stood from his porch and walked forward. His steps were slow, deliberate, each one pulling the crowd's attention toward him. When he reached the bottom of the steps, he looked directly at Karen, his voice calm. "And what will you do when you realize you've been living on my land all along?" The crowd gasped, the words hanging heavy in the air. Karen's smirk faltered, just for a moment, before she forced it back. "Lies!" she shouted. "You're nothing. You don't own anything here. I own the rules, and the rules own you." The man didn't argue. He simply pulled a small folder from under his arm, tapping it lightly before tucking it back again. His eyes never left hers. "Then let's see how the law feels about your rules," he said. His tone wasn't angry or loud, but the certainty in his voice was sharper than any shout. The neighbors murmured again, louder this time, and Karen's face reddened as she turned on them. "Don't listen to him. He's tricking you. I've protected you for years. Without me, this place will fall apart." But her words didn't carry the same weight they once had. The neighbors didn't look at her with fear. They looked at her with doubt. Karen raised her papers high again, shouting louder. "He is evicted. The HOA demands it." But her voice cracked, and for the first time, no one echoed her. The man's calm eyes swept over the crowd, and the silence that followed felt heavier than her scream. Slowly, he turned back toward his porch, leaving Karen shouting into the empty air. The neighbors didn't cheer, but they didn't cower either. They simply watched, their whispers stronger now, their fear beginning to crumble. That night, lanterns appeared again on porches. Not as many as would come later, but enough to make Karen nervous as she peered out her window. The man sat on his porch once more, calm and steady, his eyes on the lake. Karen muttered to herself in the dark, gripping her wine glass tightly. "They are mine. They'll always be mine." But outside, the faint glow of the lanterns told a different story. The people were beginning to see the cracks in her crown. And the man, watching quietly, knew it was only the beginning. The next morning the valley woke to the sound of raised voices. Karen was already on the street, pacing in front of the cabin like a guard dog, her red jacket bright against the pale dawn. She shouted into her phone, her voice sharp enough for every neighbor to hear. "Yes, officer. Come quickly. We have a trespasser here, refusing to leave. He's breaking every rule, putting our community at risk. I want him removed immediately." She snapped the phone shut and smirked at the crowd gathering on their porches. "The law is on my side," she barked. "Let's see how calm he looks when the police drag him out." The man stepped out onto his porch, just as calm as the night before. He didn't hurry, didn't raise his voice, only leaned against the railing with his cup in hand. Neighbors whispered from the shadows of their porches. She called the cops on him. "This is it. He'll be gone." But others shook their heads. "No, he doesn't look worried. He looks like he's waiting." The children sat cross-legged on the steps, wide-eyed, sensing the tension thick in the air. Minutes later, sirens cut through the silence, flashing red and blue spilling across the cabins. 2 patrol cars pulled up, and officers stepped out, scanning the scene. Karen rushed forward like she was leading a parade. "Over here," she cried, pointing at the cabin. "That man. Here's the problem. He's refusing every order, breaking every regulation. I want him arrested now." Her voice cracked with triumph as she turned to the crowd. "See? This is what happens when you cross me." The officers exchanged a glance but said nothing yet. They walked toward the man, who straightened but did not flinch. He set his cup down and folded his arms, waiting. Karen darted in behind them, her words spilling out like poison. "He doesn't belong here. He's a danger to us all. We voted him out, and now you need to do your job and take him away." But before the officers could speak, the man reached into his jacket with slow, deliberate movements. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Karen screamed, "See! He's reaching for something. Dangerous. Arrest him now." But when his hand came out, it wasn't a weapon. It was a leather folder, worn but neat. He opened it and pulled out a thick stack of papers, each stamped with seals and signatures. He handed them calmly to the nearest officer, his voice steady. "You should read these first." The officer glanced down, flipping through the pages. His brow furrowed, then rose in surprise. He turned to his partner, showing him the documents. They both nodded slowly before facing Karen. One said carefully, "These are property deeds." Karen's smirk froze on her face. "What? That's impossible." The officer held the papers higher, showing the official seals to the crowd. "According to these, he owns the land this cabin stands on. He also owns the parking lot down the road, and the lake itself." A wave of gasps and murmurs rushed through the neighbors. "He owns the lake. The parking lot too. All this time." Karen's face turned pale, her mouth opening and closing with no sound at first. Then she shrieked, "No! Lies! He forged them. He's tricking you." But the officers shook their heads. "These are legitimate. Stamped and recorded with the county. This is solid proof." The man's voice cut through her screams, calm and sharp as a blade. "You tried to push me out. You thought rules could erase me. But you forgot one thing. This land has always been mine. The water you use, the parking lot you fight over every weekend, the very lake your rules pretend to control, all of it belongs to me." The neighbors erupted into whispers, some in shock, others in awe. For years they had watched Karen control every inch of their lives, but now the ground beneath her power had been ripped away. She tried to laugh, but it came out broken. "No, no, you can't. I'm the president. I make the rules. I decide who stays and who goes." But even as she shouted, no one looked convinced. Her voice sounded weaker, thinner, drowned out by the murmurs of the crowd. The officers stepped back toward the man, handing him his deeds with quiet respect. "Sir, you're well within your rights to stay here," one said. Then they turned to Karen, their voices stern. "And you, need to stop making false reports. Misusing emergency services is a crime. Karen froze, her eyes wide, her lips trembling. She tried to protest, but the words stuck in her throat. The neighbors no longer hid behind curtains. They stepped closer, some whispering, others smiling faintly for the first time in years. They had watched her humiliate them, fine them, tear down their gardens, and call the police over nonsense. But tonight, they saw her stripped of power, her authority crumbling. The man picked up his cup from the porch railing and took another sip. His calm eyes swept the crowd, then returned to Karen. "This is only the beginning," he said softly. "You can shout all you want, but the truth is louder. And now everyone can hear it." The neighbors felt it in their bones. Something had changed forever. Karen was still shouting, but for the first time, no one was listening. The news of what happened at the cabin spread across the valley like wildfire. By the next morning, the entire community was buzzing. Neighbors gathered in small groups, whispering excitedly. "He owns the lake. The parking lot too." Karen looked like she'd seen a ghost. For years they had bowed their heads when Karen passed, afraid of her red jacket, her fines, her threats. But now something had changed. They no longer spoke of her with fear. They spoke of her with disbelief, even mockery. And that was something Karen could not tolerate. Furious and desperate, she stormed into the county courthouse dragging a heavy briefcase stuffed with papers. Her face was red, her eyes wild, and her jacket was wrinkled from the restless night she had spent pacing. She slammed the papers onto the clerk's desk, shouting, "I demand an emergency hearing. This man is a fraud. He forged those deeds, and I'll prove it in court." The clerk raised an eyebrow, weary of her shrill tone, but processed the request. Within hours, word spread that Karen had forced a legal showdown. The neighbors poured into the courthouse, eager to watch. When the hearing began, the room was packed. Every bench was filled, people lined the walls, and reporters squeezed into corners with their notepads and cameras ready. The judge entered, his gavel striking with a sharp crack. "This session is now in order," he announced. "We are here to review the claims brought forth by the Homeowners Association and the counterclaims of ownership." His eyes flicked toward Karen, who sat at the front with her stack of papers piled high like a wall between her and the world. Across the aisle sat the man, calm as ever, his leather folder resting lightly on the table. His wife sat beside him, her expression steady but firm, their children waiting quietly with neighbors who had offered to watch them. Karen leapt to her feet before the judge even finished speaking. She waved her papers dramatically. "Your Honor, this man is a liar. He tricked the police, and he tricked this community. These are the real records." She slammed her documents onto the judge's bench with a loud thud. The crowd murmured, but not with fear. Their whispers were tinged with doubt. The judge adjusted his glasses and began to flip through the pile. His brow furrowed almost immediately. Page after page, his frown deepened. Finally, he lifted one and held it to the light. "These documents are sloppy forgeries," he said flatly. Gasps erupted through the room. "The dates don't align. The signatures are copied. And these seals are printed, not embossed. This is not evidence. This is fabrication." The neighbors broke into louder whispers. She forged the papers. She tried to trick the court itself. Karen's face turned pale, but she refused to back down. "No," she screamed. "They are real. They have to be real. Don't you see? Without me, this place will fall apart. I am the president. My word is law." The judge's gavel struck hard. Your word is not law in this courtroom. The law is the law, and the truth stands above all." The man finally rose from his seat, carrying his leather folder with the same calm precision he had shown from the beginning. He placed it gently on the judge's bench and opened it. Inside was everything: stamped deeds with official seals, photographs showing the boundaries of his property, records from the county registrar, and evidence of Karen's years of harassment, letters, fines, and even recordings of her threatening families. The judge studied each page carefully, his expression grim. "This is valid," he declared at last. "These deeds are legally binding. The lake, the parking lot, and this cabin all belong to this man. The HOA has no authority over him. Furthermore, this evidence proves a pattern of harassment by the HOA president. The courtroom erupted into gasps, then cheers. Neighbors leapt to their feet, clapping and shouting. The chant began again, rising like thunder in the chamber. No more fear. No more lies. No more fear. The sound rolled through the courthouse, shaking its walls, spilling out into the street where more neighbors had gathered to hear the news. Karen screamed over the noise, her voice breaking. You'll regret this. All of you. Without me, you'll be nothing. You'll beg for me to come back. But no one listened. For the first time, her voice was powerless. The neighbors didn't shrink from her. They stared at her with cold eyes, some laughing, some shaking their heads. Even the officers in the courtroom looked at her with disdain as they collected the forged papers from the floor where she had dropped them. The man didn't raise his hands in victory, didn't shout. He simply turned to the crowd, his calm eyes steady, his voice quiet but firm. She thought fear was power. But fear only rules if you let it. Truth has always been here, waiting. And tonight, it stands. The neighbors erupted into cheers once more, their voices merging into a roar that drowned out Karen's last desperate cries. The judge struck his gavel again, his tone final. This court will prepare a full ruling. But let it be clear, the HOA's claims are void. Its president has submitted falsified evidence. And effective immediately, its authority over this property is dissolved. The neighbors rushed out into the sunlight chanting, their lanterns glowing even in the day. Karen was left sitting in the courtroom, her red jacket sagging, her papers scattered like ashes, her crown of fear shattered. And as the man left the room with his family, surrounded by grateful neighbors, it was clear to all. Her reign was over, and the valley would never bow to her again. Karen left the courthouse in a fury, her face twisted with rage, her red jacket flaring behind her as she stormed across the parking lot. Reporters shouted questions, neighbors whispered and laughed, and the man walked calmly past her, his leather folder tucked under his arm, his wife and children close at his side. He didn't even look at her, and that stung her more than any insult. She slammed her car door shut so hard the sound echoed, but inside she sat frozen, gripping the wheel with trembling hands. They think it's over, she hissed. They think they've beaten me. They have no idea who they're dealing with. She drove off recklessly, already plotting her next move. That evening, she summoned the HOA board to an emergency meeting at the community hall. Only a few showed up, nervous and uneasy, their eyes darting like children caught in a lie. Karen slammed a pile of new documents on the table. This is not finished, she declared. We will fight back. We will draft new rules, new complaints. We'll show the court he is dangerous, and we'll strip him of everything. But the board members shifted uncomfortably in their seats. One of them finally whispered, Karen, the judge already ruled. He owns the land. We can't fight that. Her glare silenced him instantly. We fight, or you're all finished, she spat. But even as she shouted, she could feel the ground slipping beneath her. Their loyalty was gone, and only fear kept them in the room. The next night, she carried her stack of papers into the community hall again. But this time the neighbors were waiting. They had heard of her meeting and refused to let her spin her lies in the shadows. Families crowded into the hall, children holding lanterns, their parents standing tall for the first time in years. Karen mounted the stage, her voice already shrill. You fools, she screamed. Don't you see? He's tricking you all. He's not your savior. He's a fraud, a manipulator, and these papers prove it. She waved her documents in the air like weapons, her eyes wild. The man sat quietly at the back, his wife beside him, his calm gaze fixed on her. He didn't interrupt. He didn't even rise. He let her scream, her words echoing off the walls, desperate and sharp. When she finally thrust her papers into the crowd, demanding someone read them, a neighbor stepped forward and took one. He scanned it, his face tightening. Then he held it high for everyone to see. This is fake, he said loudly. It doesn't even have a signature. Gasps filled the room. Another neighbor snatched a sheet from her hands, Then another, passing them around. One after another, the lies were exposed. No date here. This doesn't even use the right seal. This is nonsense. Karen's face turned red, sweat dripping down her temple. They are real, she shrieked. You're all blind. Without me, you'll collapse. You'll drown in chaos without my rules. But her screams were drowned out by the sound of neighbors raising their voices. One shouted, "You tore down my garden." Another yelled, "You fined me for my mailbox." A woman cried, "You humiliated my children." Their voices overlapped, growing louder and louder until it became a storm of anger years in the making. Karen tried to shout over them, but this time her voice was swallowed whole. The neighbors' chant rose, stronger than it had ever been. No more fear. No more lies. No more fear. The sound shook the hall, echoing across the valley, spilling into the night. Karen clutched her ears, screaming at them to stop, but no one listened. They were no longer her subjects. They were free. Finally, the man rose. His calm presence silenced the chant without effort. He walked to the front, setting his leather folder gently on the table beside Karen's scattered forgeries. His voice was low, steady, carrying into every heart. Fear always shouts loudest when it is dying. Lies scream when truth is near. Tonight, you have seen both. She no longer rules you. You rule yourselves. This community belongs to you, not to fear. His words spread through the crowd like fire. Neighbors clapped, cheered, and some wept openly. Children held their lanterns higher, their flames glowing like stars inside the hall. Karen stumbled back, her red jacket sagging on her shoulders, her papers spilling across the floor. She looked around wildly, but no one stepped forward to defend her. The board members slipped quietly out the door, leaving her abandoned. The officers in the back moved closer, waiting. For the first time, Karen realized she was truly alone. She dropped her papers, sank to her knees, and whispered brokenly, "No, this can't be." The neighbors didn't look at her with pity. They looked at her with the strength of people who had finally broken their chains. The chant started again, softer this time but steadier, almost like a promise, no more fear. And this time, Karen had nothing left to fight with. The courthouse was overflowing the next morning. Word of the explosive meeting in the community hall had spread beyond the valley, and people from nearby towns came just to witness the downfall of the woman who had once ruled with fear. Reporters lined the steps, cameras flashing, microphones thrust forward as neighbors poured into the building holding lanterns even in daylight as a symbol of their unity. Inside, the air buzzed with anticipation, the sound of whispered voices like the hum of bees. Some neighbors clutched one another's hands, others whispered prayers, but all of them waited for the moment they had dreamed of for years. Karen arrived late, storming through the doors with her red jacket buttoned high and her face drawn tight with exhaustion. She carried another box of papers, her last desperate attempt to convince the court of her power. But this time, no one moved out of her way. The crowd didn't lower their eyes or retreat in silence as they once had. Instead, they stared openly, some smirking, some shaking their heads, others whispering with clear contempt. She marched forward stiffly, her papers rattling in her trembling hands, her confidence forced but already cracked. The man entered quietly a few minutes later. He didn't need to force his presence. His calmness alone made the room fall into silence. His leather folder was tucked neatly under his arm, his wife at his side, their children waiting with trusted neighbors near the back. As he walked, the crowd parted naturally, raising their lanterns in silent respect. He gave no speech, no smile, only a slight nod, but that was enough to steady every nervous heart in the room. When the judge entered, the gavel's crack silenced all whispers. His voice was grave as he addressed the court. "We are here for final judgment regarding the claims made by the Homeowners Association and the evidence presented by both parties. After review of testimony, documents, and conduct, this court will decide not only on ownership but on whether crimes have been committed." His eyes fixed on Karen, who sat stiffly in her chair, her papers piled before her like a crumbling fortress. Karen shot to her feet before he finished. "Your Honor, these are real documents," she shouted, waving her papers with wild eyes. That man is dangerous. He manipulated this community, tricked you with forged deeds, and convinced these fools to turn against me. Without me, they will collapse into chaos. I am their order. I am their safety. Her voice cracked at the last word, shrill and desperate. The judge raised his hand sharply. Enough. Sit down. She froze, then sank back into her chair, her face pale but still trembling with rage. The man rose slowly, placing his folder on the bench before the judge. He opened it with steady hands, pulling out certified deeds, county records, and stamped maps. His voice was quiet but firm. These documents have been verified by the registrar's office. They prove without doubt that I am the owner of this cabin, the parking lot, and the lake. The HOA never had authority over this land. Furthermore, the evidence inside this folder shows years of harassment, fines without basis, and threats made by the HOA president. He handed the folder to the clerk, who passed it to the judge. The judge examined the documents carefully. His expression hardened as he flipped through them, pausing at the forged letters Karen had issued, the recordings of her voice berating neighbors, the photos of roses torn up, shutters fined, cars ticketed without cause. Finally, he set the folder down and looked directly at Karen. His voice cut through the heavy silence. This evidence is overwhelming. Not only have you overstepped the bounds of your authority, but you have falsified documents, harassed residents, and abused your position for personal power. This is misconduct, this is harassment, and this is fraud. Effective immediately, the HOA under your control is dissolved, and your actions will be referred for criminal prosecution. The room erupted. Neighbors leapt to their feet, clapping, cheering, some crying openly. The chant broke out once more, rolling through the chamber like thunder. No more fear. No more lies. No more fear. Lanterns were raised high, glowing even against the bright courtroom lights, their flames a symbol of victory. The sound spilled out into the street, where the crowd outside picked it up until the entire valley shook with their voices. Karen collapsed back into her chair, her face drained of color. No, this can't be, she whispered, clutching at her papers with shaking hands. You need me. You'll regret this. But the officers were already stepping forward. They gathered the forged documents, then placed a hand on her shoulder. You'll need to come with us. Her eyes darted wildly, looking for anyone to defend her, but no one moved. Not one neighbor looked at her with pity. They only stared back with hard eyes, their faces lit with relief. The man didn't smile, didn't boast. He simply turned to the crowd, his calm voice steady. Fear has shouted for years. Tonight, it fell silent. Truth is all that remains. His words quieted the cheers for a moment, sinking into every heart. Then the chant rose again, louder than before. As Karen was escorted out of the courtroom, her red jacket sagging and her papers scattered like ash, the neighbors lifted their lanterns even higher. They had been broken once, silenced by fear, but tonight they were whole again. Tonight, they were free. Karen was dragged out of the courthouse by officers, but her fury burned hotter than ever. She twisted against their grip, her shrill voice echoing across the steps. You can't do this to me. I am the president. They need me. Without me, they're lost. Reporters crowded closer, microphones thrust forward, cameras flashing to catch every word of her meltdown. The neighbors who had followed the case spilled out behind her, their lanterns raised even in the daylight, their voices rising in chants that drowned her screams. No more fear. No more lies. The sound rolled like thunder, filling the street and traveling across the valley. Karen kicked, clawed, and shouted, but her words no longer pierced their hearts. They had grown immune to her fear. That night, she made one last attempt. She crept into the community hall alone, dragging another box of forged papers, her red jacket crumpled and stained, her hair wild. She set the papers on the stage, her eyes glittering with desperation. They think I'm finished, she muttered to herself. But I'll show them. I'll make them listen. She grabbed a microphone and flicked on the lights, her voice blasting through the speakers. Listen to me, she shrieked. Without me, your homes will collapse, your lake will rot, your lives will crumble into chaos. You think he saved you, but he will destroy you. I am your order, your leader, your protector. You will regret the day you betrayed me. But the hall wasn't empty. Neighbors had seen her slip inside, and soon the doors opened. Families walked in with their lanterns glowing, their children at their sides. They filled the room quietly, their faces calm but cold. Karen's words faltered as she realized her audience wasn't bowing their heads or looking away. They were staring straight at her. She raised one of her forged papers, waving it frantically. This proves it. This shows he's dangerous. A man from the crowd stepped forward, took the paper, and held it high. This is fake, he said firmly. The crowd murmured in agreement. Another neighbor grabbed another page, then another. Each one was false, each one another desperate lie. Soon the floor was littered with Karen's forgeries, crumpled and worthless. Her face turned red, veins standing out on her neck as she screamed, "No! You fools! Without me, you'll tear each other apart. I made this place. You owe me everything." But the neighbors' voices rose together, no longer whispers but a united wall of sound. One shouted, "You fined me for my shutters." Another cried, "You ripped up my roses." A mother yelled, "You humiliated my children." Their voices overlapped, building louder and louder until the hall shook with their anger. Karen screamed over them, but her words were swallowed whole. Then the chant began again, louder than ever, shaking the walls. No more fear. No more lies. No more fear. Karen clutched her ears, her screams breaking into sobs. She dropped to her knees, her red jacket sagging, her papers scattered like ashes around her. For the first time, she looked small, powerless, broken. She begged through her tears, "Please, you need me. I was only trying to help. Don't turn against me. Don't leave me." But no one moved. No one comforted her. The neighbors stood united, their lanterns glowing brighter, their eyes steady. They had lived in fear for too long, and now they were free. The man stepped forward from the back of the hall. His calm presence silenced the chant without a word. He set his leather folder on the table beside her scattered lies, then spoke softly, his voice carrying to every corner. Fear always shouts before it dies. Lies always scream before truth silences them. Tonight, you have seen both. She no longer rules you. You rule yourselves. You are free. His words settled deep into every heart. The crowd erupted into cheers, tears flowing, laughter breaking through years of silence. Lanterns were lifted high, glowing like stars in the hall. Karen collapsed fully, her shoulders shaking, her voice reduced to a whisper no one heard. Officers stepped forward quietly, placing their hands on her arms. She didn't fight this time. Her strength was gone. She was escorted out through the crowd, and the neighbors didn't flinch or bow. They watched her pass with hard eyes, not pity but finality. She was no longer their ruler. She was just a woman whose reign of fear had crumbled into dust. The man turned to the neighbors, his calm eyes shining in the glow of their lanterns. Truth stands. Fear is finished. The crowd roared, their voices rolling like thunder across the valley. Lanterns rose higher, their flames defiant against the night. For the first time in years, the valley was truly free. That night the valley looked like a festival. Lanterns glowed on every porch, lining the streets in golden light, and families gathered outside instead of hiding behind curtains. Music played from an old radio, laughter rose from groups of neighbors sharing food, and children ran freely across lawns without fear of being scolded or fined. For years, joy had been muffled, crushed under Karen's rules, but now it returned like a flood. The lake itself reflected the light of floating lanterns, glowing like a river of stars. For the first time in memory, the valley was alive with celebration instead of silence. The man sat quietly on his porch with his wife beside him, their children curled up near their feet, their faces glowing in the lantern light. He didn't raise his voice or call attention to himself, but neighbors kept approaching, one after another, offering food, thanks, and handshakes. "You saved us," one woman whispered, her eyes teary. No, the man said calmly, shaking his head. You saved yourselves. You chose truth over fear. That is stronger than anything I could have done alone. His words spread through the crowd, repeated in whispers until they became part of the night's celebration. Across the street, Karen's house was dark. Curtains drawn, no lanterns lit, no sound but the faint shuffle of her pacing inside. She could see the glow outside, hear the chants of "No more fear" echoing through her windows, and each sound stabbed at her pride like a blade. She pressed her palms against her ears, muttering, "They'll regret this. They'll need me again. They can't survive without me." But even as she spoke, the chant outside grew louder, drowning her words until she was silenced by the very people she had once controlled. The celebration lasted deep into the night. Neighbors who had barely spoken to one another for years now laughed and shared stories of Karen's cruelty, not with shame but with triumph. One man told how she had fined him for painting his shutters the wrong shade of blue. The crowd laughed until tears streamed down their faces. A mother described how Karen had ripped her roses from the ground, and the neighbors promised to help her replant them in the spring. Each story, once whispered in fear, was now shouted in joy, proof that Karen's grip had truly broken. As midnight approached, the people gathered at the edge of the lake. Each family carried a lantern, lighting it carefully and setting it afloat on the water. Slowly, the lake filled with hundreds of glowing flames, drifting gently together, reflecting in the dark water like stars fallen from the sky. The chant began again, softer this time but steady, carried by every voice. No more fear, no more lies, no more fear. The sound rolled across the hills, rising into the sky as if the land itself was breathing free at last. The man stood with his family at the water's edge, his calm eyes on the floating lanterns. His wife leaned against him, whispering, "It feels like the valley is alive again." He nodded once, his voice low but sure. "Fear has no place here anymore. Tomorrow, it ends for good." His children held his hands tightly, their eyes wide with awe as they watched the lanterns drift. To them, the lake no longer felt like a place of rules and threats, but a place of hope. The neighbors stayed late into the night, some singing softly, others simply watching the lights. When at last they returned to their homes, they left their lanterns burning in windowsills and on porches, their glow carrying into the dark like a promise. For once, there was no fear of fines, no fear of punishment. Only peace. And when the first light of dawn touched the valley, people were already gathering again. They dressed quickly, their lanterns still burning, and walked together to the courthouse. The crowd was larger than ever before, filling the steps, spilling into the streets. Reporters swarmed with cameras and microphones, capturing every moment. Children sat on their parents' shoulders, chanting with their small voices, "No more fear." The chant grew louder, rolling like thunder until even the walls of the courthouse seemed to tremble. The man arrived quietly, as always, his leather folder tucked under his arm. The crowd parted for him without being asked, their lanterns raised higher as he passed. He did not smile, but his steady presence was enough to calm every nervous heart. His wife walked at his side, their children following close, and the neighbors whispered in awe. "He's so calm. Like he already knows the outcome. Like truth itself walks with him." Karen arrived moments later, but there was no cheer, no fear, no support. She stepped out of her car, her red jacket wrinkled and sagging, her hair messy, her papers clutched in trembling hands. She tried to smirk, tried to look powerful, but the crowd didn't flinch or move aside. They stared openly, their eyes hard, their whispers sharp. Some even laughed bitterly. Her face faltered, but she forced herself to march up the steps anyway, her shoes clicking hollowly on the stone. Inside, the courtroom filled quickly. The judge entered, his gavel striking, and silence fell. His voice was stern as he declared, "This session will deliver the final ruling. After today, there will be no more questions." The crowd leaned forward, hearts pounding, lanterns glowing even in the harsh courtroom lights. Karen clutched her papers, her lips moving as though whispering a prayer, but her eyes betrayed her terror. The man sat calmly, his folder resting on the table, his eyes steady. The moment had come, and everyone in the valley knew it. Today fear would be buried forever. The gavel struck once, and the heavy silence inside the courtroom pressed down on everyone present. The judge's eyes swept the crowded room, lingering first on Karen and then on the man. Karen sat rigid, her red jacket rumpled, her face pale and drawn. Her hands clutched a stack of papers that trembled with every shallow breath. Across the aisle, the man sat calmly, his leather folder resting on the table before him. His wife sat tall beside him, her hands folded neatly in her lap, while their children waited quietly in the back with trusted neighbors. The contrast between the two could not have been sharper. Karen shaking and desperate, the man steady and unbroken. The judge cleared his throat, his voice strong and unyielding. This court has reviewed every document, every testimony, and every action taken in this matter. The evidence provided by the defendant has been verified and is beyond question. The deeds are authentic, the ownership clear. This cabin, the parking lot, and the lake belong to him. Gasps spread through the courtroom, even though many already knew the truth. Hearing it spoken officially by the court sealed it forever. The judge turned his gaze to Karen, his voice colder now. The documents you have submitted are falsified. The signatures are forged, the seals copied, the claims fabricated. Furthermore, your actions against the residents, fines without cause, threats, harassment, and lies, are beyond the scope of your authority. You have abused your position as president of the HOA, turning what should have been a duty of service into a weapon of control. Effective immediately, the HOA is dissolved. Its rules hold no power. Its authority is finished. The room exploded. Neighbors leapt to their feet, clapping, crying, and shouting. The chant burst out, stronger than ever before, no more fear, no more lies, no more fear. The sound shook the walls, pouring through the doors into the streets outside, where the crowd waiting picked it up like a rolling wave. Reporters scribbled furiously, cameras flashing, capturing the moment the valley's chains were broken for good. Karen stumbled to her feet, her papers spilling across the floor. "No!" she screamed, her voice shrill and cracking. "You can't do this. You'll regret it. All of you. Without me, you'll drown in chaos. You'll beg for me to come back." Her words were drowned out by the roar of the people. She turned wildly, pointing at the man with shaking hands. "This is his fault. He tricked you. He. Her voice collapsed into sobs, her body shaking, her power gone. The judge struck his gavel again, his tone sharp as a blade. "Enough. Your authority is stripped. And your case is being referred to the state for criminal prosecution." The officers at the side of the room stepped forward. One bent to gather her scattered papers, another took her arm firmly. She tried to pull away, but there was no strength left in her. She sagged against them, her red jacket drooping off her shoulders as they led her toward the door. The neighbors didn't step aside. They didn't lower their eyes. They stared at her openly, their lanterns glowing bright, their voices still chanting. For the first time, she was the one who had to bow her head as she passed. The man rose slowly, his calm presence commanding silence without effort. He turned to the crowd, his eyes steady, his voice low but clear. "For years, you thought silence was safety. You thought fear was stronger than truth. But look at what you've done today. You stood together, and fear fell. Lies burned to ash. This valley is yours again." His words sent a fresh wave of cheers through the room, neighbors embracing one another, children clapping and laughing, officers nodding with respect. Outside, the courthouse steps turned into a festival. Lanterns floated upward into the blue sky, glowing against the daylight as if the stars themselves had come down to join the celebration. The chant rolled across the valley, bouncing off the hills and echoing across the lake. No more fear. No more lies. The sound was unstoppable, a roar of victory that carried further than any threat Karen had ever screamed. Karen was pushed into a patrol car, her face pale, her eyes hollow. She looked out through the glass at the crowd cheering, chanting, raising their lanterns high. For the first time, she realized that her reign was not just broken, it was erased. No one feared her. No one wanted her. She had become nothing more than a shadow, fading in the light of truth. The man stood at the top of the courthouse steps, his wife and children beside him, surrounded by grateful neighbors. He did not smile or boast. He only looked at the sea of lanterns, at the people chanting with free voices, and whispered, "Truth stands. Fear is finished." His words carried on the wind, settling into the hearts of everyone who heard them. And as the patrol car drove Karen away, the people lifted their lanterns even higher, their flames bright in the midday sun. The valley had been ruled by fear for years, but now it belonged to its people. And nothing could take that away again. That night the valley was unrecognizable. Where once silence and fear had ruled, now music, laughter, and light filled every corner. Lanterns lined every porch, every fence, and every path, their flames glowing like tiny suns. Families who had once hidden behind curtains now gathered together in the open, sharing food, telling stories, and smiling without hesitation. Children ran through the streets, their laughter ringing louder than it had in years, unafraid of being scolded or fined for simply being children. It was as if the valley had been holding its breath for too long, and now it could finally exhale. The man sat on his porch with his wife and children, his leather folder tucked safely inside the house, no longer needed as a shield. His wife leaned against him, her hand warm in his, her eyes reflecting the glow of the lanterns. "It feels like the valley is alive again," she whispered softly. He nodded, his gaze calm as always. Fear held them in silence for too long. Now they've found their voices, and nothing can take that away. His children curled up near his legs, safe and content, their faces glowing with the light of freedom they would grow up knowing. Neighbors came one after another to thank him. Some brought food, others small gifts, but most simply offered their gratitude with tears in their eyes. An old man clasped his hand and said, "She fined me until I couldn't eat some nights. But you stood firm. You reminded us we didn't have to bow." A mother hugged her child tightly as she whispered, "You gave them back their childhood." Each story was another weight lifted, another wound healed. The man only replied with the same calm words, "You saved yourselves. I only showed you the truth." Across the valley, Karen's house sat in darkness. Her windows were covered, her curtains drawn, no lanterns glowing. She had been taken away earlier in the day, her red jacket wrinkled and stained, her eyes hollow with defeat. The neighbors no longer spoke of her with fear. When her name was mentioned, it was only with scorn or pity. Her shadow no longer stretched across their lives. It was gone, swallowed by the light of the lanterns that burned brighter than ever before. Near midnight, the neighbors gathered by the lake. Every family carried a lantern, their flames flickering gently in the cool breeze. One by one, they set them on the water, watching as the glowing lights drifted out across the surface. The lake shimmered like a field of stars, each flame a symbol of freedom. Children clapped and pointed, their wide eyes reflecting the glow, while parents stood silently, hands clasped, their hearts full. The chant began again, not angry now but steady, proud, and filled with hope. No more fear. No more lies. No more fear. The sound carried across the hills, rolling through the valley and echoing far beyond. A song of victory that would not be forgotten. The man stood at the edge of the lake, his wife beside him, his children holding his hands. He looked out at the lanterns drifting together, their flames growing smaller in the distance, and spoke softly. Fear thought it owned this place. But fear dies. Truth does not. Tonight proves it. His voice was quiet, but everyone heard him. Neighbors lifted their lanterns higher, their cheers breaking into the night sky as if the stars themselves answered. When dawn came, the valley looked new. Doors opened wide, neighbors greeted one another cheerfully, and children played loudly without worry. The roses that had been ripped up would be replanted, shutters would be painted bright again, and laughter would no longer be silenced. The courthouse ruling had sealed Karen's downfall, but it was the people who sealed their freedom. The red jacket that once symbolized power lay forgotten, its image meaningless in the light of a new day. The man sat on his porch with his family as the sun rose over the water. He didn't boast or command. He only watched the light touch the lake, listened to the laughter of children, and breathed in the peace that had finally returned. His wife rested her head on his shoulder and whispered, "It's finished." He shook his head gently, his calm eyes still on the horizon. "No," he said. "It has just begun." And as the sun climbed higher, the valley glowed, not with fear, but with life. The evening at the lake was peaceful, almost dreamlike. The sun dipped low, spilling golden light over the cabins that lined the water. Windows glowed warmly, children laughed as they played by the shore, and neighbors sat on their porches enjoying the cool evening breeze. It was the kind of moment that made people forget their troubles, the kind of quiet that felt rare and precious. But peace in that neighborhood never lasted long, not when the HOA was around. Especially not when Karen, the HOA president, was in one of her moods. Her voice could slice through the air like a knife, and everyone knew that once she had chosen her target, there would be no mercy. That night, she chose the man in the cabin at the far end of the road. He was a quiet man, polite but private, who rarely bothered anyone. He kept his property clean, his porch neat, and his presence calm. But that calmness angered Karen more than chaos ever could. She thrived on fear, and this man never gave her any. He didn't argue, he didn't panic, and he didn't bow to her threats. To Karen, that was the greatest insult of all. So, with a stack of papers clutched in her hand and a group of HOA members trailing behind her like soldiers, she marched down the gravel road, her heels clicking like war drums. Neighbors saw them coming and quickly pulled their children closer, whispering nervously. Doors creaked shut, curtains twitched, and the once lively street grew tense. Everyone knew where Karen was going, and though they were curious, none dared to intervene. The children who had been laughing moments ago now sat silently, sensing the storm in their parents' eyes. "She's going to the cabin," one neighbor whispered to another. "This time, she's really going to try and drive him out." The other shook his head. "She'll regret it. Something about him. He's not like us. He's not afraid." Karen stopped at the edge of the man's porch and jabbed her finger at the cabin as if she were pointing at a criminal's hideout. "You!" she shouted, her voice sharp and shrill. The sound carried across the lake, startling a flock of birds from the trees. She held up the papers high for everyone to see. "You have no right to live here. This cabin is not approved by our association. You've broken our rules. You think you can hide in silence, but silence doesn't excuse defiance." Her face twisted into a smirk as she turned to the HOA members behind her. They nodded awkwardly, more out of fear than loyalty. The man appeared slowly in the doorway, stepping out into the fading light. He didn't rush, didn't speak. He simply stood there, tall and calm, his eyes steady on Karen. In one hand, he carried a cup, and he took a slow sip as if this confrontation was no more concerning than the sunset. His silence made the neighbors lean forward, watching from their porches and windows, their hearts racing. They had seen many people break under Karen's voice, but they had never seen anyone face her without trembling. Karen took his quietness as arrogance. She marched up the steps and waved the papers in his face. "Do you see this? This is an official notice. The HOA has voted. We all agreed. You are trespassing on community property. You have 48 hours to pack your things and leave. If you don't, I'll make sure the sheriff drags you out himself." She laughed loudly, looking around at the silent neighbors as if expecting applause. No one clapped. Instead, their eyes darted back to the man, waiting for what he would do. The man's calm eyes didn't move from Karen's face. He set his cup down on the porch railing and folded his arms, his voice low but steady when he finally spoke. "And where will you all park after I leave?" His words were soft, but the question hit like thunder. The neighbors frowned in confusion, whispering to each other. Karen blinked, caught off guard, before forcing a laugh. "Don't play games with me. You don't own anything here. We own this community. You own nothing." But there was a flicker of unease in her voice, a crack in her certainty. The man didn't argue further. He didn't shout or wave papers of his own. He simply watched her with those calm eyes, and in that silence the neighbors felt something shift. Karen could sense it too, and it made her furious. She turned to the crowd, lifting her papers again. You see? This is what happens when we allow outsiders to defy our rules. If we let him stay, he'll ruin everything. I am protecting you, all of you. You need me to keep order here. But her words no longer sounded like protection. They sounded like desperation. The neighbors whispered, their eyes flicking between Karen's red, furious face and the man's calm, steady silence. And in that moment, it was clear to everyone watching. Karen was shouting louder than ever, but the man didn't need to raise his voice at all. His calmness was stronger than her fury. The lake that had been quiet at the start of the evening now seemed to hold its breath. The neighbors waited, sensing that this confrontation was only beginning. The papers in Karen's hand shook as she jabbed them at the man one last time. "Mark my words," she hissed, her voice sharp with rage. "You will regret this. I'll have you out of here if it's the last thing I do." The man didn't flinch. He only picked up his cup again, took another slow sip, and replied in the same steady tone. "We'll see." And with those two words, the peaceful evening at the lake was gone, replaced by a tension that wrapped itself around every cabin and every porch. The neighbors retreated into their homes, whispering to each other about what was coming. And as the sun disappeared behind the hills, one thing was certain. The fight between Karen and the man was only just beginning, and the valley would never be the same again. Karen stormed away from the man's porch, her heels hammering the wooden steps as if she could crush him by sound alone. The HOA members trailed after her, whispering nervously, their eyes darting back at the cabin where the man still stood silently with his cup. The neighbors who had been peeking through curtains quickly stepped back as Karen passed, but when her shadow was gone, they leaned out again, whispering to one another in hushed, excited tones.